welcome to The Starting Line. And today I'm in conversation with Lily Cole. And so I thought I'd just start by asking you, just how did you end up getting so passionate about climate change? Just tell us, where does your passion for climate change come from?
A passion for climate change is a strange phrase, right? Because I'm not exactly passionate about climate change, maybe passionate about the prevention.
Yeah. Passionate
prevention of
about
climate
fixing the problem,
change. Just love climate change. So I got into it because I had, when I was modeling, I'm not modeling so much these days, but when I was modeling a lot as a teenager, I found myself in this kind of strange privileged position where I was being asked by lots of different charities to support this cause or that cause, or to kind of, I guess, lend my voice or public kind of access to press, I guess, to different causes. And I'm quite curious by nature, and I think I've always long cared about social and environmental issues, but went on a bit of a journey trying to understand the world, I guess, and what the different issues are, and the work of different organizations and charities. And through the process of doing that, which lasted a few years, and I worked with different organizations and I traveled a lot, it became very quickly clear to me that the environmental situation we were in, and we're still in, but this is 15 years ago, that we were in was terrifying. And at the time, I mean, forgive me, you've been in the climate movement forever, so maybe it felt mainstream to you, but 15, 18 years ago, it felt somewhat niche compared to the movement today. And I think and I think that's kind of a point of optimism we can discuss. But when I was a teenager, it seemed still like a kind of somewhat sidelined cause amongst a list of causes. And as soon as I thought about it and looked at it, I was just like, how can this be sidelined? I mean, this is our only home, and this is our ability to survive as a species. And every other issue, whether it's animal rights or human rights or kind of children's rights, will be negatively impacted, and is already sometimes being negatively impacted by an unhealthy environment. So it just sort of felt like the rug underneath everything else, and really fundamental. And at the same time, I was working with different companies, obviously, as a model. And the other kind of thing that very quickly struck me was the kind of how illogical it was to separate out business from philanthropy. The social business movement felt somewhat nascent. And again, I think that's another point of optimism, that actually, it's grown in such strength, and kind of the idea of CSR has grown, so much in that time. But at the time it felt like, business is allowed to do bad things by and large and make problems. And then we have charities to come and fix the problems and try and clean stuff up and, be philanthropic. And that felt, really illogical to me, to separate out those forces. And so I was very quickly interested in business as a force, and whether business can be a force for good, and the examples, which of course existed at the time, of businesses trying to do practices in a better, fairer way, and trying to have a positive impact. And I still work with charities. I've been a patron of the Environmental Justice Foundation since then, as an example. And I think that, charities obviously have an important role to play. But what I quickly started doing was probably putting the energy that I would put into philanthropy or activism into business, and trying to align those things.
Lots of points in common. I mean, I came at this. I mean, really, I've had two passions, like climate and business, and they work on a parallel. But as early as 1987, had a physical encounter with accelerated warming when I was supposed to be doing some scientific research on the snout of a glacier on the east coast of Greenland that wasn't there when we got there. Because this is before digital mapping, right, and before satellite mapping. The map had been surveyed several decades before, so where the glacier had been when the map had been surveyed, it wasn't. And it was a really kind of profound. It was like the sky's falling in kind of moment, because you're taught as a young adventurer that maps are the truth, right? And then you get somewhere and there's something that's on the map that just physically isn't there. I mean, it's like a mountain not, because I thought glaciers as permanent things. It's like a mountain not being there, or a city not being there. I mean, it's really dislocating. It's like some weird Alice in Wonderland experience. It took us a long time to realize that we were in the right place as the glacier was in the wrong place. No, but you've used the word optimism several times. I know that's a really important idea for you and for me, and I think anyone who's an activist has to be an optimist, right? You have to get up with the belief that you can change things. But tell us a bit about your book and about the centrality of this, the importance of optimism to your activism.
So I wrote the book, well, for a few reasons, but one of the things I was thinking about when I approached it was just recognizing how much in the 15 or so years I've been working in this space, how much positive momentum I was seeing behind different really important movements and trends. At the same time, the trajectory from a scientific perspective, as you know well, and the kind of rhetoric from scientists is having like the opposite trajectory, right? And it's becoming increasingly terrifying. And it felt like so much of the attention and the media focus is often on is on that kind of state of alarm, which is important, right? It's important that we understand the science and we understand the problem. But I felt like it was also really important to recognize that there are tons of solutions. There are tons of activists, entrepreneurs, politicians, people really trying to solve these challenges. And that by focusing on the potential solutions, we are more likely to see them manifest or come to power, and that ordinary people, can play a role in helping different solutions come into fruition. So yeah, it was a kind of trying to capture, I guess, in the midst of this scary climate, the reasons I hold on to for hope, because I think there are many.
What do you think about, I mean, there are people who say that it's already too late and we should just be in adaptation mode. What do you think that's, what do you think about that, about as a stance to engage with that action?
I mean, I certainly agree that we need to be in adaptation mode as part of a strategy. I think it probably is too late to avoid any warming. I mean, we've already warmed the planet by over a degree and there'll be more. And so adaptation needs to be, I think, really considered, and even like, sensitive migration policies right now, because there are more climate refugees than there are refugees of war. And that's not talked about very much in a lot of the rhetoric of like, actually, how do we adapt to the fact that things have already changed and they're already, they're gonna change further. But that being said, the amount that they change, i.e. the degree to which we continue not only warming the planet, but also, wiping out areas of nature that's essential for biodiversity and the kind of biodiversity crisis, that is still completely at play. And so the idea that we should kind of give up and just like, to me makes no sense whatsoever.
But tell us a bit more about your book. I'm really intrigued about this idea of wizards and prophets, by wizards and prophets.
Sure. So I borrowed that terminology from a book by Charles Mann called The Wizard and the Prophet, because I was looking at a really wide spectrum of solutions and ideas. And the reason I did that is because I think that the problem that we're facing is so complicated and so complex. The idea that any single person or organization or company has the answer is deeply problematic. And also because it feels like our society is often becoming increasingly polarized around different important debates. And that with this enormous kind of world-holding debate, we actually need to come together and we need to collaborate and we need to listen. And so by virtue of that approach, I needed to embrace all the different environmental types of thinking and activists. And Charles Mann's terminology, the wizard and the prophet, captured for me quite clearly this really wide spectrum that you do find within the environmental landscape, between the kind of green tech knowledgists and capitalists who, kind of Thomas Friedman amongst them, who would argue that we need kind of capitalism and technology and innovation to solve these challenges. And then to the other end of the spectrum,
so those would be the wizards, would they? Like
they would be the wizards.
magical new technology. solve
Yeah,
all
that
problems.
everything will be fine because we'll invent some like techno fix that will like, we'll put sulfur in the sky, or we'll extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or we'll just get loads of green electric cars, or, you know, all of that kind of innovation approach. And then on the other hand of this, other end of the spectrum, you have the kind of Greta Thunbergs of this world who would argue, no, we need to be vegan and buy less stuff and simplify and connect with nature. And historically, there has been that tension, I think, for many, many years within the environmental community. It'd be interesting to your thoughts on it. And so I was trying to, capture those range of views, because I think actually all of them are important to listen to. And then the last quarter of the book looks quite a lot at like indigenous communities and completely different ways of society is operating, and how we might kind of take inspiration from or learn from other ways of understanding our social relationships and our understanding of our relationships with the planet. And the opportunity I think we have right now, and some of the indigenous communities I've spent time with have articulated very well, is the possibility of kind of, they don't use the language wizard and prophet, but in my mind, bringing together the kind of the wizards and the prophets, because we have the opportunity to learn from indigenous communities, to learn from communities that are more prophet-like, i.e. they have a deeper relationship maybe to their natural environment and understanding of the natural world around them, different value systems, but also marry that with the amazing benefits that technology has given us, and not be dismissive of that, and kind of try to bring the best of different worlds together, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, because there is a tendency to talk as though you have to choose one of the because of course often people are in camps, right? I mean, there's increasingly, but I do love the idea of rather than having those as poles or as camps, have them as inputs into a kind of mashed up solution set, which recognizes that they both have value. And
my mum was telling me, I'm just remembering this morning, I was going for a walk chatting to my mum, and I was looking at the bluebells, and she was saying the bluebells, what she say? She was basically saying that like when you mix together species in gardening, it's much better. Like the outcome is much, much better when you get hybrids. And so it's a bit like that. It's like for evolution to really work well, we need to like,
well, for society to work well, I mean, we know that if you want a good company, you're much better off having diverse genders, lived experiences, intellectual backgrounds, so you don't get groupthink. I mean, diversity is important in so many ways for resilience and for thriving and for ideation, right? Because if you've all had the same lived experience, you're unlikely to be sparking off each other. And in a way, that's partly what Gonzalo and I are charged to do. And what we've noticed is that the work on mitigation, so the race to zero, is often tends to get very techno quite quickly. The really interesting area, I think, in terms of the wizards and the prophets, is resilience. When you're talking about how do we make communities resilient, and that's not just about electric vehicles. That's more about ways of being, ways of governing.
And what are the things you're exploring in that space?
Well, one thing I notice is that there's a tendency, and I think using the language of the wizard and prophet, to have a sort of camp of wizard solutions and a camp of prophet solutions. So I would say, in the world of resilience, and this is an observation I have, because I spent most of my time in climate change focusing on mitigation, like so big businesses, technology, emissions reduction. Now I'm responsible for running this. I have the role which has a mandate in support of the Paris Agreement, so mitigation, resilience, and finance, and the resilience conversation is often more led by grassroots organisations, and including indigenous peoples, but women, slum dwellers. I mean, we have Sheila Patel as an ambassador, who's an amazing leader of amongst Slum Dwellers International. But that there seems to be a huge gap between the big businesses and grassroots, and one thing what we're trying to do is figure out how can we bring those two groups together, so that so the uniqueness which they both bring is harnessed without being swamped by the other. So the ability to drive to scale and to deploy resources that multinational companies have isn't swamped out by the fragmentation and the different processes in the grassroots, so that the businesses just get fed up and run away, and we lose the ability to harness. But also that the grassroots aren't swamped by the size and the power of the businesses who cease to listen to the sort of context-specific wisdom that the grassroots has. I think that's quite a challenge, right?
And then you've got a very interesting problem in a way, which I think has long plagued the nexus point between social work and environmental work. They're not done in parallel, which is that, you know, how do you lift billions of people out of poverty, for want of a better word, and do that in a way that's not going to completely destroy our ecosystems, when the small percentage of the world that are already kind of living in developed countries are already swamping our ecosystems, if that makes sense. So
yeah, totally. And so so you pose the challenges: how do we lift people out of poverty without killing the environment? And you can pose the question the other end: how do we stop killing the environment without leaving a lot of people in poverty? Because I think one of the very I mean, I'm a big fan of the use of science fiction to explore possible futures, right? And in fact, we've got a climate imagination project we're running in the run up to Glasgow. But you know, you can very clearly see that, and this is something that's been played out in many science fictions, that there is a solution, which is a kind of climate apartheid, where you have, you know, electric vehicle gated communities and nothing, right? With the majority of people having nothing and no emissions, which is kind of an extrapolation of what we've got now with this real.
I was going to say, it's not far from what we've got now.
It's not so far from what we've got now in terms of the maths of it. But so what we're trying, so with the resilience work, it's more of a nexus play than mitigation, because you have to deal with the human. You have to deal with the human, because resilience is about lived experience. You can abstract your thinking much more easily when you're just talking about mitigation. So I'm really intrigued as how we can bring the sort of wizard mind and the prophet minds to that work.
And also something else that gives me optimism, for want of a better word, is how mirror-like we are to one another as a species. I feel like we assume that the way things are, and even the deep way that kind of society functions, the kind of deep values we have and the way that we interact with one another, sometimes are assumed to be really permanent and fixed.
Yeah, like their human nature, the results of human nature rather than constructs. Yeah. I'm really struck by the conservatism of a lot of thinking about the future, with people not prepared to contemplate a future that they can't plot their way to in great detail. You know, all innovation comes around through embracing a constraint, like, you know, do something far, make something faster, lighter, cheaper. What we really need is a moonshot where people commit to something they don't quite know how to do. Like it's so that it's so I think there's a sort of moonshot, which is what we should all be embracing. Then there's what I call the safe shot, which is, you know, you know what you're prepared to commit to, and you can promise because you know exactly how to get there. And then the dead shot, which is like, you know, the terrible future that you haven't even bothered to stretch yourself with. But it's really interesting that most, if you look at, say, in the UK's very ambitious 68% by 2030, 78% by 2035, 100% by 2050. If you look at the Climate Change Committee's research and recommendations, they have a scenario which is faster innovation in technology. So it's not a different technology, it's just assuming that we push the technology faster. They show a pathway to getting to net zero by 2042. So what, in many ways, what Gonzalo, my fellow high-level champion, and I are trying to do is get everyone to take 10 years off from their safe shot to commit to a moonshot. But even getting everyone to 2050 is a huge stretch. But I actually think that by combining the wizards and the prophets, you know, 2042 is still a long way away, right? That's a lot of social change, a lot of technological innovation. And I think we get.
I mean, I debated this a bunch with people I know, like XR activists and scientists. I'm sure you know that Extinction Rebellion have this goal of
25.
25, yeah, for net zero. And I'd been part of a group kind of lobbying the government to try and do net zero by 2050 around that time. And so I was kind of debating what's that, what is the time frame that's necessary / possible. And even though I'm kind of very grateful that the government made the commitment 2050 as a start. And I understand that you have to do these changes in a socially sympathetic way, that, if you do them too radically, it could just hurt and alienate a lot of people. I can also understand the urgency that communities like XR feel, that it's like, when the threat is this high, when it's an existential threat, why would we be taking safe shots? Why would we be not doing everything? If our house was literally on fire, you'd be doing everything in your absolute power to get that fire out. I'm not saying I'll deal with it, in the next 10 years. Yeah, so it's I do understand the urgency that
So I just slightly different, because I think the fire analogy is a really interesting one, but the important analogy is there is that, okay, if it's your own fire, you put it out as quick as possible. But a fire in a theatre, right? When everyone does everything they can in a fire in a theatre, then hundreds of people die because everyone just runs for the exit and they trample on each other's heads on the way out. So in an emergency, you need
order.
calm, controlled, orderly
Yeah,
transitions. And so I think that the truth is between the 2050 and the 2025. I mean, if I could snap my fingers and have zero emissions resilient economy appear tomorrow morning, then we'd have net zero or carbon positive and nature restorative in 2021, right? That's obviously, but the question is, how do you get there in a way where you don't lose the political agency?
I'd be curious your thoughts, because then you do have, alongside that, and I'm completely on board with that. But then you do have governments making sometimes decisions that seem completely counter to the idea of urgency and the goal.
Well, I guess I would say that, politics is really messy, right? And people who are in power are trying to juggle all sorts of complicated things. And one of the hardest things is that we're always in climate change time to making an argument for something that's in the future, particularly jobs, right? I mean, I remember I worked in the automotive industry, and it's always much easier to argue to preserve some jobs which exist today than to invest in jobs which exist tomorrow, because there are votes in jobs which exist today.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I looked a bit, it's a good point, and I looked a bit at this in the book, the need for sensitive kind of transitions, because the reality is, by changing our economies in the way that we need to, we will inevitably displace and change many, many jobs. And we need to be mindful how to deal with that. I'm curious to hear from you, how you feel in the run up to COP with your role, and kind of, how optimistic you are or not.
Well, I think I'm feeling really optimistic about the shift in momentum towards zero. I mean, now everyone's agreeing that zero is the goal. That wasn't the case a year ago. We've now got all the G7 countries committed to net zero, and all coming up with their 2030 plans in line. And yet, when you add up all the plans, we're still not going anything like fast enough. But I do think it's a ratchet process. It's a question of whether we can ratchet enough fast enough. So that's going in the right direction.
What's your hope of an outcome of COP?
Well, three. I mean, the first is that the multilateral system is seen as thriving. So, there's a good consensus outcome. And as you know, what's being negotiated is relatively detailed Paris rule book, but it matters. Transparency, reporting, trading, all those things, like agreeing some of the details of that. And I think that's one thing. That's sort of what's actually negotiated. The other thing is that there's real significantly increased momentum at the national government level, and there, the Biden summit, the UK summit in December, and the Biden summit, and we see that with UK, Japan, USA, Canada, all Europe, all stepping up a lot. Hopefully, we'll see more from some of the other big economies like India, China, Australia, South Korea. I mean, really, I'd sum it up. The two things I hope is that this COP is remembered as a moment of action and solidarity. So action that we're, yes, seeing all that raised ambition, but we're seeing real evidence of things happening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just talking about what people are going to do, but people are committed to and what they're doing now. Because I think that, this is a decade of action, so we can't. So all of our work on Race to Zero is not about 2050 targets. It's about what are you doing in the next 5 years, consistent with getting to zero in 2050, and then solidarity, so that it's what are we doing together to address the climate justice issue? So particularly resilience and finance, and that. Well, multilateralism alone, when it works, it feels like solidarity, but it will only really feel like solidarity if the real economy is also. And so I think some of the precursors to that are really important, like vaccines. Is there a sense of global solidarity around vaccines by the time we get to Glasgow? If not, it'll be a very difficult backdrop, right? Because it'll mean there's a sort of lack of justice in another realm as a backdrop to the justice element, which is at the heart of the geopolitics of climate change. So I'm feeling positive about mitigation, but that we need to spend more attention to the justice issues, which is resilience and finance. So two out of three to focus on. Lily, it's been fantastic speaking with you, and really, and we haven't even talked about the fashion industry, which is would be really interesting. But I think that you're
But what my line on fashion will be? It's coming in fashion, truly. Sustainability is totally coming into fashion, which is great, which is what we want.
I mean, my line to every business person I talk to is it's whatever industry you're in, it's coming. Yeah. And in fact, it's probably already there. And if you're not aware of it, then you're probably too late.
But fashion is interesting because fashion isn't just clothes. Fashion is our minds. It's our mindset, right? And the fact that sustainability is genuinely becoming very fashionable, I think says a lot about the culture shift we're going through.
Yes. Nice point. Good point to end on. Lily, thank you so much. It's been really fascinating to wander around and I think so many nice to be challenged on a few areas, but also to find so much in common in terms of the way we're thinking about this hugely challenging but necessary transformation that we're all working on. So look forward to seeing you again soon.
Take care.
Bye.